Max knew he would never forget the Christmas season. It wasn't the tree or the presents, the ornaments glimmering in the light, or even the snow gently falling outside his window. For Max, it was the rush of getting whatever he wanted. And this Christmas would be no different. The night was crisp, the sky darkening as Max walked with his parents through the bustling town square. Decorations twinkled above their heads, casting a warm glow over the sidewalks, but Max barely noticed. His mind was already elsewhere, focused on finding the one thing he hadn't gotten his hands on yet. That's when he saw him. A Salvation Army Santa stood on the corner, his red suit stark against the cold evening. He was ringing his bell, a clear, familiar sound piercing through the festive music playing in the background. People dropped change into his kettle as they passed, oblivious to the boy eyeing the bell. Max's lips curled into a mischievous grin. Without a second thought, Max slipped behind the Santa figure, who was focused on the crowd, and grabbed the bell. He pulled it from the old man's hand with ease, tucking it into his jacket before anyone could notice. Max ran away from the square, heart pounding with the thrill of victory. No one had seen him. No one would ever know. The bell was his now. He had claimed it, just like everything else in his life. That night, Max lay in bed, staring at the bell resting on his nightstand. The cold metal glimmered under the dim light. Max grinned, the sense of power coursing through him. He had stolen from the Santa, taken what didn't belong to him, and nothing could touch him. As the sound of carolers drifted in from outside, he closed his eyes, unaware that the curse was already beginning. Max awoke in the middle of the night to the sound of a faint jingle. He turned his head, looking around his room, but there was nothing. Just the familiar darkness of his bedroom. He dismissed the sound, deciding it was nothing more than a dream. But as he tried to fall back asleep, the jingle came again, louder this time. It echoed through the stillness of the night, distant but distinct. Max furrowed his brow, puzzled. Was it the bell? He reached over to the nightstand and grabbed it, cold, solid, no glow, nothing out of the ordinary. Still, the sound seemed to grow, tugging at his attention, pulling him from the comfort of sleep. He tried to convince himself it was nothing. Maybe someone down the street had a Christmas decoration with a bell. Or perhaps the sound was just his imagination playing tricks on him, but it wouldn't stop. The jingle persisted, lingering like a whisper in the distance. It was getting louder. Max tossed and turned in bed, covering his head with his pillow, but the sound remained, faint but unmistakable. Finally, exhausted, he drifted into an uneasy sleep, the jingling echoing in the back of his mind. The following day, Max tried to forget about the jingling, but it was hard to ignore when the noise came again that night, louder and more insistent. This time, Max was awake when it began. He could hear the ringing in the distance, getting closer with every passing second. His heart skipped a beat. There was no way it was just a coincidence. The sound of the bell wasn't normal. It was too precise, too deliberate. Max leapt out of bed and rushed to his window, looking down into the yard. No one was there. His eyes scanned the street, but it was empty. The only movement was the wind, brushing through the trees, swaying the branches. Yet, the jingling continued. His pulse quickened. He grabbed the bell from his nightstand again. It felt colder this time, like it had been outside in the snow, but he hadn't touched it in hours. Max, determined to find an answer, searched through his bookshelf. There, tucked away behind a pile of holiday books, was a dusty old tome. It was an old family heirloom, one that Max's parents had kept for years. The book was filled with stories and legends, most of which Max had never cared to read. But now, he needed answers. Flipping through the pages, his eyes caught something. A story about a cursed bell. According to the tale, the bell had been used by a spirit, a ghostly Santa who demanded repayment from anyone who dared steal it. Those who took the bell from him were bound to face his wrath. Max snorted, superstition. It was just an old tale to scare children. He dismissed it with a laugh, but the jingle persisted. The next few nights, the jingling grew unbearable. It echoed in the walls, in the floors, in the very air around him. Max couldn't escape it. The bell, cold and steady, sat on his nightstand, glowing faintly in the darkness. Its presence felt oppressive. One night, Max couldn't take it any longer. He grabbed the bell and rushed outside, hoping the night air would clear his mind. The streetlights flickered above him as he walked, the sound of his footsteps muffled by the snow underfoot. He made his way back to the town square, to the spot where he had stolen the bell. Maybe if he returned it, it would stop. But when he arrived, the Salvation Army centaur was nowhere to be found. The kettle sat there, empty, the bell ringing in the cold wind. Max stood there, staring at the bell in his hand. His chest tightened. He couldn't feel the same rush anymore. There was no joy in it. He turned to leave, but then he heard it. A voice, low and hoarse, spoke his name. Max spun around, his heart racing. There, in the shadows, stood the figure of Centaur, but he wasn't the jolly old man Max had seen earlier. This was something else. His face was pale, his eyes dark and empty, like hollow pits. "You took what doesn't belong to you," the ghostly Centaur said, his voice sending chills through Max's spine. Max froze, unable to move. "Return it," the Centaur whispered. The days blurred together. Max tried to go about his life, but the jingling never stopped. He heard it when he was alone in his room, in the bathroom, even when he was outside. The sound of the bell followed him, growing louder each day, filling his ears, his mind. At night, the ghostly Centaur appeared again, a dark, towering figure. His voice echoed in Max's mind. "You have taken the bell," the figure said. "And now, you must pay the price." Max tried to resist, but the more he defied the Centaur, the stronger the curse became. Each time the jingling grew louder, more persistent. Max's sleep grew fitful. His mind, once sharp, was clouded with fear. He couldn't run from it anymore. He couldn't escape the ghostly figure. The Centaur's warning had been clear. The bell's curse would follow him forever. Max's eyes began to tear up, but he refused to give in. He had to find a way out. By the fourth night, the jingling was deafening. Max couldn't sleep. The sound filled every room in his house, every corner of his life. It was relentless. In the middle of the night, when he would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, the bell sound seemed to press in on him. He tried to ignore it, but the terror was becoming too much. Max couldn't focus in school. He couldn't even sit still. The pressure was too intense. The bell haunted him wherever he went. At night, the ghostly Centaur appeared again, standing by his window, peering through the glass with his hollow eyes. "There is no escape," the figure whispered, its voice colder than the winter air. Max trembled. He was trapped. Max finally realized the truth. The curse wasn't going to go away. The Centaur figure was relentless, always watching. He had stolen the bell, and now he had to face the consequences. He was being dragged into an eternal nightmare. With trembling hands, Max clutched the bell to his chest, his only remaining option, return it. But the Centaur was waiting. He had nowhere to run. The moment had come. Max could feel it, the weight of his greed, the heavy toll of the curse. The jingling never stopped. Days bled into nights, nights into weeks. Max's mind began to crack under the strain. His family no longer recognized him. His friends avoided him, sensing something was wrong. And still, the jingling persisted. Max had long since lost track of time. Days had bled into one another, each indistinguishable from the last. The relentless jingling of the cursed bell filled his ears, even when there was no bell. The sound had become part of his life, an inescapable presence that haunted his every waking moment. He could no longer separate reality from the horrors that taunted him, could no longer tell if the world around him was real or just another extension of the curse. His home had grown silent, a hollow shell of the place it once was. His parents, concerned but unable to help, no longer knew how to reach him. Friends had drifted away, unable to bear his sudden mood swings and fearful rants about the ghostly centaur. Max had become a stranger to the people he once knew. The jingling, though, never stopped. It never gave him respite. One night, Max sat by the window, staring out into the snow-filled night. The bell, cold as ice, rested in his trembling hands. He had tried everything to return it, to destroy it, to bury it, to cast it into the deepest waters. But no matter what he did, the bell always found its way back to him. It was as if the bell itself had a mind, a will, something far more ancient and malicious than Max had ever realized. "Please," he whispered, his voice hoarse, breaking the quiet of the room. "Please, I'll do anything. Just let it stop." But the bell didn't respond. It didn't need to. The jingling grew louder, the sound filling the air, filling his very soul. Max collapsed to the floor, clutching the bell to his chest, unable to breathe, unable to think. The curse had taken everything. His joy, his freedom, his life. All of it had been consumed by the curse of that bell. Then, just as he thought he could bear it no longer, the shadow appeared again. The ghostly centaur, its hollow eyes glowing faintly, stood in the doorway, his cold gaze fixed on Max. The bell in his hand jingled once more, as if mocking Max's pain. "You took what wasn't yours," the centaur said, his voice like an icy wind. "And now you will pay the price for all eternity." Max wanted to scream, wanted to fight back, but his voice failed him. The centaur's figure loomed larger, its presence suffocating. The room seemed to darken around him, as though the very air was being drained of warmth. The jingling intensified, vibrating through the walls, through Max's very bones. It was too much. It was everywhere, his mind, his body, his soul. "You will never be free," the centaur whispered, its face contorted with cruel satisfaction. "The bell is yours, and you are mine." Max closed his eyes, the tears streaming down his face. He could no longer hear his own thoughts, could no longer distinguish the pain from the curse. All that was left was the endless ringing, the eternal jingling, the sound that would never, ever stop. And as the shadow of centaur loomed over him, Max realized the terrible truth. The curse was not just on the bell, it was on him. For as long as the bell existed, so too would he, trapped forever. The jingling echoed, louder than ever before, until it was the only thing left.